Chris Watts tucked his daughters into bed, kissed them goodnight, and strangled them. Hours earlier, he had told his pregnant wife, Shanann, that he loved her. That same night, he killed her, too. The psychological paradox that haunts criminologists is how ordinary he appeared. Absolutely no history of violence, no prior arrests, a quiet, devoted father who coached his daughter's soccer games. By every public measure, he was completely normal. This profile repeats itself with a frequency that is difficult to process. In the United States, a woman is killed by an intimate partner every 16 hours. The perpetrators are almost never random attackers in dark alleys. They are the men these women chose and trusted. The pattern crosses every socioeconomic boundary. Scott Peterson was a charming, mild-mannered California fertilizer salesman. Neil Entwistle was a Cambridge-educated British man living out a suburban American dream. Different bank accounts, different backgrounds, exact same outcomes. Decades of behavioral research suggest that the very qualities creating deep devotion, complete emotional investment, and intense attachment are the precise mechanisms that can fatally invert. To understand this violence, we have to stop looking for obvious monsters. In the 1980s, evolutionary psychologists Martin Daly and Margo Wilson set out to map how romantic attachment turns lethal. Their work established the foundation of what researchers now call the proprietariness model. This diagram illustrates their findings. In a healthy dynamic, the bond is a reciprocal connection between two independent people. But in a highly proprietary mind, attachment mutates, entirely wrapping the partner until love is literally ownership. This possessive architecture can remain stable for years, activating only when it registers a specific trigger, a perceived abandonment threat. If a partner emotionally withdraws, mentions a trial separation, or starts building an independent life, the perpetrator's brain registers an intolerable loss. This trigger launches a silent, non-violent phase right before a physical separation occurs. One partner has internally decided to leave, and the other has unconsciously registered the shift, yet neither has spoken the reality aloud. Researchers refer to this highly lethal window as the dark quiet. The dark quiet is exceptionally dangerous, specifically because of how peaceful it feels. The visible fights often cease. The tension appears to break. The victim thinks it's winding down, rendering the escalating fatal threat entirely invisible. When forensic psychologists look at the data from these crimes, they do not see random acts of passion. They see behavioral architectures falling strictly into one of three predictable profiles. The first is the controlling proprietor. Cases involving individuals like Paralympic athlete Oscar Pistorius fit this category closely. The violence is the final, inevitable point on a long, heavily documented timeline of monitoring movements, isolating the victim from family, and escalating abuse. The second profile is the facade killer. These are men who operate with absolute external normalcy. Their entire identity is anchored to a carefully constructed image of being the perfect family man, and they cannot tolerate that image collapsing. When men in this category begin extramarital affairs, they realize they cannot maintain the family facade alongside the infidelity. Rather than dismantle their lie and face public failure, they make the catastrophic choice to eliminate the family. Psychologists clinically define this as image preservation homicide. The third profile is separation-triggered reactive homicide. Here, investigators find zero long-term planning and no prior history of abuse. The violence detonates from a sudden, complete psychological fracture at the exact moment the partner attempts to walk out the door. The interview transcripts from perpetrators in this third category are deeply disturbing. They consistently use severe dissociative language, telling forensic psychologists that their bodies acted on their own, or they simply weren't there when the violence occurred. Whether the crime involves weeks of meticulous planning to save face, or a sudden violent fracture in a hallway, the underlying architecture is identical. All three profiles are terminal expressions of a threatened proprietary bond. Because the violence follows a structure, it can be tracked. Dr. Jacqueline Campbell at Johns Hopkins University spent decades compiling global research to build the danger assessment tool, a heavily validated metric used to predict lethality before the first strike. This chart tracks the single highest statistical predictor of future homicide, prior strangulation. The sustained physical intimacy and active decision-making required to place hands around a partner's neck acts as a massive 7x multiplier for eventual murder. The second major predictor tracks a phenomenon called separation assault. If we overlay the timeline of a relationship onto the data, the risk of lethal violence spikes by 400% at the exact moment the victim attempts to leave. Look at Shanann Watts through these metrics. She was 15 weeks pregnant, and she had been privately telling friends she wanted a separation. According to clinical data, she was occupying the single highest risk statistical window possible, with absolutely no access to the science that could have warned her. We have heavily validated predictive tools. We have the psychological maps. So why have intimate partner homicide rates in the United States remained completely static for 30 years? The data points to a massive cultural failure. As a society, we consistently fail to diagnose extreme possessiveness as a clinical warning sign. We look at intense jealousy, isolation, and proprietary attachment, and we mislabel them as romantic devotion. If that attachment is left unchecked, it reaches its final stage. Survivors who escape lethal attacks consistently report that in the moments before the violence began, their partner's eyes changed. The perpetrator completely dissociated, no longer looking at them as a human being, but as a possession about to be lost. During his FBI confession, investigators asked Chris Watts what he felt while murdering his family. He paused and told them he didn't know who he was in that moment. It leaves us with the terrifying reality that even perfectly mapped science cannot protect us when the human mind quietly fractures in the dark.